Okay, let's have a look at the object property options for pattern fill. And as you can see, I've filled some lettering here with pattern fill and given it a certain outline. You can fill any object as well with pattern fill. So I've got a flower over here, also with an outline. Now the reason I've got an outline is if I ungroup this, because it's grouped, and just select the outline and hide that, you'll be able to see what I mean. So with pattern fill, it creates rows of the motif. It stitches across. Well, let's run the stitch player. So let's get past the red to the purple. Okay, so here we are, and you can see here it's stitched an outline part here to get round to the various areas. Normally when you sew a step fill or another type of fill, it will run across the design to get to the areas it needs to fill first in order to fill each area. But with pattern fill, because it's see-through, the motifs are open, lacy type motifs, it can't really run across underneath because you would see it. So it has to run around the outside. Sometimes this means there'll be gaps though, like here, where it doesn't need to travel to get to the next motif. So you usually need to either put an outline around your design, or if it's have it overlapped with another object to hide those inconsistencies of the edges. Your outline doesn't need to be satin. It could be single run, triple run, sculptured run, any of the outline stitches you like to choose, so that you can have an either lighter or heavier finish, so long as it hides the area, hides the gaps. Okay, I think we've seen enough. We can see how it's formed, so we can stop that. And here's our flower. So let's go to the object properties of that and see what options we have. So I'll right click on the fill and go to the object properties in the pop-up menu, and here we are. Now it's very similar in lots of ways to the fancy fill options, so I'm not going to go into great detail about some of these options here. What I'd like you to do is go back and watch the fancy fill video first. It is a long video, but it's worth it, even if you have to watch it in sections and come back and start again later, because otherwise this video will get way too long. So we can change here, I'll just briefly go through, we can change the X size of the individual motifs. So each of these little motifs are an individual. If I go to the select, this is the default, and that is the motif that is being repeated. So each of those you can change the X, which is the horizontal width of the motif. I'll just cancel that. Or you can change the Y, which is the vertical, the height of the motif. Bear in mind that if you change the size, you will make it, if you make it larger, it's going to start overlapping unless you change the spacing between each motif. If you make it smaller, it will leave gaps and you will get little jumps between the motifs. So just remember that, and you may need to change your spacing. So you have a column spacing, which is your vertical columns, so the distance between the one motif and the one next to it and so on will usually match the width of the motif so that they butt up against each other and there's no jump stitch. So once you've decided on your size, then you need to make your column spacing the same if you don't want any overlaps and you don't want any jump stitches. The row spacing refers to each individual row, so if your height is changed, you might need to change the row spacing as well to close up any gaps, or open it up to make it larger to make sure the motifs aren't overlapped. The offset offsets each individual row. So I'll just give you a quick example. If I offset half the width of the motif, so in this case the size X is 11.52, let's just say 11.5 to round it off, so that's 5.75 will give me that. So if I make this 5.76, actually, that will be even closer. So I'll put that in the offset, 5.76, and apply that. And you can see now that my motifs have moved across, and each row has moved across so that the row before it is centered over the gap. You don't have to do it half, you can do it any number you like until you get a pattern that you are happy with. So I'll just undo and redo so you can see that happen. Undo, they're all above each other. If I redo, they've been pushed, each row's been pushed across a bit, so they're no longer in a vertical row, they look like they're in a diagonal row. So you can get different looks with that tool. I'll undo that again. Okay, the major difference with pattern fill is that you can have an alternate pattern. That is, you can have one row of one pattern stitch and the next row of a different pattern stitch, and then the first pattern stitch in the following row, and so on. So let's have a look at that. We'll click on the alternate pattern, and it's put one in, the last one I was using, so not the a different one to the default, so just ignore that for the moment. We're going to actually select the pattern we want. So I'm going to click on the select pattern here, and I'm going to choose this one down here. Okay, doesn't matter, you just choose whatever you like and play around with it and go OK, and then you need to apply that, of course. It's giving you a preview in here of what it will look like. So I'm applying that. Okay, I'll move this box over here out of the way because I want to zoom in here a little bit and show you what's going on. So you can see that these two rows are not evenly spaced. They're actually touching each other here, and you've got a gap here. And if you look very closely, you can see that the first pattern that we had has actually started to overlap, and the second pattern is normal. So the reason for this is that the spacing, between the rows and columns is determined by the smallest pattern. So if your alternate pattern's width is narrower, that is size X is narrower than the other pattern, then it will take on the width of the alternate pattern because it's trying to avoid jump stitches, but in fact it's actually created little jump stitches under this pattern up here. If we zoom in very closely, there's a jump stitch across here before it goes on. If I go out of true view, it really doesn't show it a lot better, but it finishes the pattern here, so it has to jump back here to start the next one, and so on. So I'll go back into true view. So you can adjust that, I'll zoom back out again so you can see it happen, by deciding what spacing you want and whether or not you'd rather the jump stitch here underneath this or between these motifs in the second row. So I would rather have the jump stitch between the motifs in the second row, so I'm going to change my spacing to, my column spacing, because that's the distance between each motif. Just have column spacing. Just have a look at the little diagram here, and when you hover over you'll see arrows showing you what that's changing. At the moment, as you can see, it reads 8 because that was the X width of that second motif, and our first motif was 11.52 wide. So if we change this to 11.52, we can apply that. And now we haven't got the overlapping here, but we've got a bigger gap here, so there's a jump stitch. We can fix that by changing the width of this motif if we so desire. So we could change the width of the motif up here to 11.52 and apply that so that both motifs are exactly the same width. That gets rid of the jump stitch. Let's have a look at it out of true view and zoom in, and we have got needle points on these longer stitches, so I don't expect them to be too long. Let's have a look at our view measure. Well, let's undo that first and see if those stitches were already there. What I'm worried about is when I change the width, will it put in extra stitches? I'm not sure that it does. You'd have to experiment out. So just be careful that you don't get too long stitches. I'll redo and go view measure. And I did get a question about how long these stitches should be, the maximum in the previous video on the fancy fill, and I said it would depend on the weight of your fabric and what stabilizer you've been able to use, but 4 to 6 millimeters is probably about as long as you'd want to go, because you get a lot of pull with really long stitches, so don't want to get them too long. Let's find the measure tool. There we go. So the distance, this looks about the longest stitch, so if I click on there and click here, that's only 3.45 millimeters long, so I'd be okay with that. 3.45, yeah, around about 3.5 millimeters, so I'm okay with that. I'll escape out of the measure tool. I have to escape twice, and I've gone back to step fill here because I haven't got the fill selected anymore, so let's just select that and it will bring me back to my object properties dialog for the pattern fill. Alright, so that's fixed. Let's go back into true view. That's fixed our width, but you know, there's no hard and fast rules. It doesn't have to be the same size. You can have them different widths. Just be aware of those jump stitches that will occur. And there is no tie in, tie off, so you need to leave those jump stitches in place. So if they're still only about 3 millimeters long, that's fine. It'll just act like another stitch. Okay, so now to fix this row spacing. So again, it's taken the row spacing from the size Y of the smallest pattern, sorry, no, of the alternate pattern. So perhaps it's all the alternate pattern. Just check which one it's taken. So I actually want a bigger row spacing. If I change it to the Y size, the height of the pattern, the largest height is 8. So that's not going to help me. I need to go even bigger. So I'm going to experiment and just type in 10 because I want a bigger row spacing and apply that. And that is better. I've got still a bigger gap here than there. So this would be a case where I would use my layout button. So I'll hit my layout button and I'll get my motifs. And I can choose this top right one. And again, if you've watched the Fancy Fill video, you will have seen me do this already and explain it in detail. So I'm going to just do it a little bit quicker this time. So I'm going to select this top left motif. And you can see that these motifs are tied together because, you know, it's not just selecting this pattern, it's selecting as part of the groupings, it's selecting the alternate pattern for the row spacing. So I'm going to hold my control key down so it restricts it to a vertical movement, and I'm going to move this down a little bit closer and enter and see what that does. Okay, that's the opposite to what I wanted, so undo. I thought it was when I was doing it. So you can undo and get back here into the, no, you have to keep undoing to get out. So select this, go to the layout, select the top left, and I need to move them further apart. So it's a bit weird, but I'm increasing. Oh, undo. I need to move it. That's better. Further apart. So let's just enter that. And okay, so I now got more even spacing between the rows. I'm still not exactly right. So you really do have to fiddle around with this. And I'm losing the shape around the edge here, but if I unhide my outline, you can see that that looks much better once the outline goes on there. So it is tricky to use the alternate pattern option, but you can get some nice effects if you're willing to play around with all your settings. So just be aware that you've got a different size for your alternate pattern as far as the width and height goes, so they affect the column spacing and the row spacing, and you'll need to fiddle either by using the mathematical options here in the object properties box or by using the layout button, or a combination of both till you're happy with the layout. Okay, before I move on to pattern filling the lettering, I'd like to remind you that if you're not already subscribed, please do so and put a check mark next to, or click on the bell notification icon so that you get notified when I upload a new video. Because if you follow along in order, they'll make a lot more sense. Okay, so let's have a look at lettering with a difficult font. So I'll open a new design here and I will get my lettering tool. So I'll expand that out and right click on the lettering icon so that I open the object properties box immediately. And I'm going to type in the word pattern fill in uppercase. I'll do the center justification because it'll be easier for you to see the whole words on screen. I'm choosing the drifter font because that's one that you may have problems with, and that has a recommended height of 20 millimeters maximum, but we're not using satin fill, so we can go bigger. So I've put 50 millimeters in there. You can go a lot bigger if you want to make, you know, a big letter to go on the back of a jacket or something. It's entirely up to you. And I'm going to go OK, and I'm going to left click on the workspace to create the lettering. Now I've gone show to fill. If we go 100%, there we go. Let's go to true view. So this is what it looks like in satin stitch, and those satin stitches are getting too long really to be a nice stitch out. Now in the previous video I broke the lettering apart, removed the stitch angles and then welded it together. The first two steps are the same, so we're going to select all of the lettering. At the moment it's all one object. If I break it apart, so edit, toolbox, break apart, you will see that I've now broken it apart into words. Then I can break the words apart into letters. So all this was in the previous video as well, so just go back and refer to that. Break apart into individual letters. The next step I did was to break those letters apart into individual objects. So we break apart, I selected all the word at once and done it as bulk, but you can do them individually. You could select the whole two words and do them, break them apart again. Now I've got individual objects in here. These are no longer lettering objects. They are individual digitized objects. And you can see the letter P has remained one object. And the letter R has remained two objects. I'll just go out of true view so you can see what I'm selecting. This is the top part of the R, that's all one object, and then the bottom part is another object. The letter N is made up of two objects. The letter I and L, Let's see if I can find those. There's the I is one object, the L's one object. So just be aware of how this is all made up. I'm going to now remove the stitch angles because that's the next step to change these from a satin fill to a pattern or indeed a fancy fill. So up here under Edit Toolbox you'll have Remove Stitch Angles. Alright, now look what's happened to the letter P. It's a little bit funny here. Let's go back into True View. There's a gap being created here, and if I look at the R, the same thing's happened. The reason for this is because this, as we saw before, this P is one object that is digitized to stitch up this way around and then come back into here. If I select the P on its own, click off so nothing's selected, then select it, zoom into the P and go to the reshape tool, you can see, if you look really closely, it's a bit confusing, but this side of the letter P comes down here. There's a node here and a node here that belong to that line that define this curve, but there's no stitching there. This part of the letter P comes around to here and then over to here, and that was the original overlap when it was a lettering object, but there's no stitching there, so it's kind of gone weird in that whole process. Don't panic yet, because it's going to get weirder. Okay, so let's just deal with the letter P, because the letters A, T, E, N, F, I, L, L, all of those letters will work the same as with the fancy fill. They'll work the same for pattern fill, but P and R will not. So we'll fix those first. So I've got the letter P selected now, and if I look in the Edit Toolbox, I can't weld this together because it's only one object. So you can't weld one object to nothing, so it's not there. Now we have to fiddle around a little bit here. I'm going to cut it into two objects by using the knife tool. So I'll get the knife tool and I'll cut through here and enter. Now it's two objects, but you'll notice if I select them both, which they are, I can weld, but I won't weld yet because you'll notice that when I cut it, the stitch angle's changed again. So we need to keep remove the stitch angles from everything again. So we'll just remove stitch angles. Now we've got the stitch angles all going the one way, but we've still got this funny gap here. If I try to weld now, even though both are selected and I've got that option, this won't work till we fix it. So we'll select this part of the letter P. This, I'll go to True View so you can see it. Don't worry about these long stitches because we're not going to have satin stitch. I've selected this part of the letter P and we'll zoom in and we'll go to the reshape tool. And you'll see now that that line there has changed. The end of this curve only comes to here. So I'm going to select this part first, the upright part of the P, and go to the reshape tool for that, and you can see that it's cut away here. So we need to remove these. We want to get a straight line down here, so we need to remove these excess nodes. If I zoom in here, I've got one here and then I've got one there, one there. I'm going to just go till I get to the last one I want to select. So I've selected that one and I'll zoom in here. I want this one to be the last one, so I'll hold down my shift key and select this one. All the nodes in between will select and I can hit my delete button, and that has fixed that line there. Now I'm going to go back to the curve. So I get my select tool, go back to the curve, go to the reshape tool, and I'm going to create a bit of an overlap by just moving this node in ever so slightly. And this one, make sure you've got the move tool and not the hand. The hand will move the start and end points. Just try and keep that shape as close as you can in this curve to what it was, but just move these in a little bit. Okay, there's an overlap there now. Up here I want to do the same thing. I want to grab this node. In fact, I can grab both of them. Hold my control key down and grab that one, and I can actually move them together. Although it's changed the curve here a little bit, so I might just click off and click this one and move that one down a bit. Just get your curve nice and smooth and make sure there's a bit of an overlap. Okay, now select it. And now select the other part by holding your control key down. You've got all of them selected. They've all got the same stitch angle. You've got two objects that are overlapping. So now you can weld them together. And there we go. That's fixed that. Now if you have got an older version of the software that doesn't have the weld tool, there is a totally different way of doing this, but it's still achievable, and it's using the outlines and offsets tool and creating objects with that. But I will finish this with the weld tool now. So I need to do the same with the letter R, but what I can do, because that part of the R is exactly the same part as the same shape as that P, so I can select this part of the R and delete it, and then I can select this P, right click and drag a copy of it over here and line it up, zoom in. I'm always looking for shortcuts. I'm just going, oh, I've made a copy, undo. I need to left click now and drag it. And I think I've got it pretty good. I'll get that down there. And make sure I've got it high enough here. Let's bring in a guideline to make sure our tops are pretty close. I'll probably go down a little bit. So while this one's selected, this part, I'm going to use the down arrow just to move it down a fraction. There we go. That's good enough for me. Click off, select those two parts of the R by using my control key when selecting the second part, and weld those together. And now I can select all the other letters. So I can select the A, the T parts, the E parts, the N parts. Oops, I moved that. Undo. Right, and I can weld those. And then I can select all those objects and make them a pattern fill. Let's go into True View by clicking on the pattern fill down here. Now you can choose whatever pattern you want. I chose, what did I choose for the other one? Let's select it and go to the object properties. Oops, fill stitch. So I chose K0022A, but that's not how it originally looked. I did fiddle around with the settings to get it to look like this, because for this, even this size lettering, you need a very small pattern. So I have actually offset it and changed the, what have I changed? I left the X and Y the same, but I changed the spacing, column spacing was the same. The row spacing I changed slightly, and I offset it 2.8. So as I said, play around with the different pattern fills. Now, as I said, if you've got an older version of the software, let's delete all of this, and you haven't got the weld tool, let's get rid of that guideline. Let's just bring in our lettering again. And the drifter font and 50mm. Okay, there we go. So what you would do if you have the older version of the software is you have to use the edit and the outlines and offsets. I just use a single run, choose a different color to what you're working with temporarily. use the common outlines choice, and I usually use the sharp corner because there's usually some sharp corners in your lettering, and go OK. And you'll notice that you'll get outlines around the letters and around these gaps, these holes as well. You can then delete your blue lettering and you can select everything except these holes. Now what I'm going to do is find these holes. There's one and the other two are at the end, so I'm going to move that one down to the bottom as well, and I'm going to change those three back to the blue colour so they look different, and then go to the colour blocks, choose all the red and change that all to a pattern fill. There we go. The problem is now you haven't got holes where the gaps were, but you've got an outline to digitize. Now if you've got Designer Plus level, there is a button here called Add Holes, and you can click on that and digitize around to make a hole. But I'm in the Creator level, you haven't got that. So the blue ones I'm going to make to a step fill, and then I'm going to use the Remove Overlaps tool. So while those blue ones are all selected, I can remove overlaps. And let's see if it did it. Yes. Sometimes it won't, depending on how dense the pattern is. But that's done it okay, so we can delete those blue ones now. And then you can add your outlines. So you choose your lettering, go to your outlines and offsets, and I decided to put a satin one, but you could put a triple. Let's do a triple this time and go OK. And there you have your lovely pattern fill lettering. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will talk to you again soon.